Welcome to CSIS Online. The way we bring you events is changing, but we'll still present live analysis and award-winning digital media from our Dracopolis Ideas Lab, all on your time, live or on demand. This is CSIS Online.
Good morning. Welcome, everyone. I want to thank you for joining us for what promises to be a really rich and engaging discussion on what African nations are doing or are planning to do in the space domain. Now, before we get started, I want to acknowledge the generous support of Parsons that made this event possible. J.R. Riordan is Senior Vice President at Parsons and someone I talked with frequently when he used to lead the staff for the Strategic Forces Subcommittee as part of the Senate Armed Services Committee on the Hill. J.R. is with us on the call today, so I want to see if he has any remarks he wants to share before we get started. J.R.?
Good morning, Todd, and thank you, and greetings from Parsons Mission Control. Parsons is proud today, Todd, to support this discussion on the African space race. We applaud the Center for Strategic and International Studies in their focus, and Todd, your focus, in this vital topic. Parsons is leading the future of space, and for the past 30 years, we've really been tracking and analyzing the evolving space environment, from low Earth orbit all the way to high Earth orbit. We have a great background, a great team of professionals of the way we can approve, deploy, and support all national and coalition capabilities to include launch integration, satellite development, space architecture, and space operations. We do provide really important mission solutions to our customers. They are all tailored to meet those needs in the rapidly evolving space domain, all from the ground up. Parsons today is delivering a better world and striving towards a safer universe, and we look forward to the discussion, Todd. Thank you for allowing us to sponsor this today. Over to you, Todd.
Thanks, JR. We have a really great lineup of speakers today. And as you can imagine, when we're talking about Africa in space, this was a perfect opportunity for our two programs here at CSIS to join together, the Aerospace Security Project and the Africa program here at CSIS. So this is a joint event for us. It's been a really great experience of putting this together. First, we're going to hear today some pre-recorded opening remarks from Dr. Monica Juma, who's the Cabinet Secretary in the Ministry of Defense of the Republic of Kenya. Let's go to her now.
Jude Devamond, Director, Africa Program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Fellow panelists, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and greetings from Nairobi. Allow me, Chair, to commence my statement by expressing my sincere gratitude to the Center for Strategic and International Studies for according me this opportunity to share my thoughts at this forum that is discussing a critically important issue relating to space, titled Africa Space Race. Ladies and gentlemen, it is clear today that space is the next frontier of human development. This reality is a sea change from a point where, for a long time, space science was seen as a preserve of defense and intelligence sectors and institutions. The liberalization and democratization of space technology and its applicability across all human endeavor has spurred participation and a multiplication of efforts to optimize the use of outer space. The space is therefore growing into an area of immediate interest and concern for all. So strategic and important has space technology become that many countries, large and small, are growing a firmly focused attention on development of space science and technology. There is no doubt that human development across many sectors is being driven by science and technology that is linked to the space. The dependence on data and its systems to shape and deliver on services and goods across the world, to manage and secure people, nations, and commerce, to understand and mitigate the effects of climate change and the environmental degradation, as well as our own social interaction, is becoming an indispensable part of our daily lives. The spin-off from space science in areas such as nanotechnology to digital communication is directly and positively impacting people's daily lives. And Africa is no exception to this development. The last 5 years have been definitive in this regard. The number of countries that have launched space programs has risen from about 5 to more than 10 countries with fully fledged space programs. Currently, more than 20 countries in Africa are active in various activities relating to the space arena, ranging from space science and exploration, development of satellite systems, satellite operations, and research to launch technologies. In the last 5 years alone, we've been witness to a launch of more than 20 satellites by African states. At the continental level, African Union has developed a continental space strategy to guide its membership in strengthening Africa's use of outer space to bolster development in critical sectors such as agriculture, disaster management, remote sensing, climate forecast, banking and finance, defense and security. It is also envisaged that investment in this sector will make considerable contribution towards creating an environment for a wider spectrum of pressing priorities that include job creation, poverty reduction, sustainable resource management, and rural development. This, therefore, is viewed as one of the critical pillars that will contribute towards the AU vision of a united, prosperous continent and one that is at peace with itself. The continental strategy provides a governance structure to coordinate and manage continental-level space activities. In particular, it commits to establishing a continental space program that is able to promote programs and projects that foster intracontinental partnerships by strengthening the existing nodes of space and in situ capabilities, harmonizing and standardizing the suite of critical facilities and infrastructure, adopting appropriate data management, and sharing policies to promote data access, and sharing the space experience to bolster the capacity of member states that wish to pursue national space programs. Ladies and gentlemen, this framework provides a clear mechanism for engagement in the necessary technology transfer, access to technologies, and data support for system development. As observed in the concept note for this meeting, depending on how this is structured, it has the potential for bolstering two-way trade and investment, to deepen national security ties, and to spur growth in a responsible manner in this public good sector. Fundamentally, a structured engagement would avoid the growing likelihood of an unhealthy competition in space, which can generate more risks rather than opportunities. For instance, it is critical that at this formative stage of the growth of the African space science, a set of protocols and commitments are mapped out to govern cooperation as well as conduct in space and space-related activities. We know today that a big vulnerability for the world lies in the cyberspace and the potential of its manipulation by negative forces, including transnational criminals, terrorists, or even unscrupulous commercial interests. The United States has an opportunity to meet Africa at this point of need. As we know, the development and appropriate use of space has the potential to spur the development of our continent. On the other hand, the US technology in space science and innovation, as well as its technological and professional competencies, stand her in good stead to have a first mover advantage in this sector. Evidence available indicates that investment and commercialization of the space gives us a good opportunity to fast-track development towards the attainment of the Sustainable Development Goals. So far, funding for these activities and initiatives has been a challenge for many African governments that rely on public funding to address competing interests for socioeconomic development. Commercial space systems in Africa have mainly been developed outside the continent, even though a few African governments own communication satellites. In addition, Earth observation data products mainly used in Africa are also being offered by entities from outside the continent. Therefore, harnessing the potential of the space industry by African states requires deliberate investment in both the upstream and downstream segments of the sector. Collaboration through foreign funding and public-private partnerships present an opportunity for the development of space systems and infrastructure. The private sector can also be supported to make such front investment. Ladies and gentlemen, Kenya is one of the several African countries that has embarked on the reinvigoration of its space program. Kenya has a rich history of launch activities, particularly between 1967 and 1988, due to a long-standing partnership with Italy. In 1962, the San Marco project was initiated by the Italian Space Commission, the National Council of Research, and the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. Today, the facility, now called Luigi Broglio Malindi Space Center, supports various missions in telemetry, tracking, and command services and satellite data acquisition. Lying squarely on the equator and adjacent to the Indian Ocean makes the Luigi station a perfect location for the launching and landing of spacecrafts. And a number of space agencies, including NASA and the European Space Agency, use this station for exploration. In an effort to secure the benefit of this facility, Kenya has undertaken a number of concrete steps to create the necessary infrastructure to support its space program. First, it has created a fully fledged space agency, has developed a space policy, and recently launched its Kenya Space Agency Strategic Plan for the years 2020-25. Areas of focus include Earth observation, navigation and positioning, satellite communications, space operations, and systems engineering, space science, and astronomy. These programs are targeted to benefit the various functions of the national government, the subnational governments, private sector, and the academia that rely on space science, technology, and applications. The Kenya Space Agency has commenced cooperation with a number of Kenyan public universities and sponsored a space weather chair in a bid to catalyze and promote research in space science and related applications. It is also partnering with the universities in the development of nanosatellites, undertaking research, and building technology capacities at postgraduate levels through a number of annual scholarships from various partners. In an effort to grow interest in space-related sciences, the Kenya Space Agency has rolled out the Global Learning and Observation to Benefit the Environment GLOBE project. This is an outreach program that promotes and sustains interest in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics subjects, which are foundational subjects for careers in space and technology. The objective here is to build a pool, a large pool that can support the scaling up of space-related competencies, activities, and programs. To promote its services in Earth observations, the Kenya Space Agency is developing a satellite imagery analysis portal to address the needs of the users. It hosts the African Regional Data Cube, a platform that monitors forest cover, land use, land change, including quality of water, water extent, and mining. This platform has transformed to become a strong tool for the reforestation program of the government of Kenya. Regionally, Kenya will continue to participate in continental and regional projects such as the Africa Resource and Environmental Management Satellite Constellation and the Square Kilometer Array in order to build capacity and harness opportunities for the space industry. In conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, Kenya, like the other space nations on the continent, has a young but promising space program that would benefit from strategic partnerships. We aspire to be a spacefaring nation by 2030, and this aspiration is geared towards the development of human capital and competencies, the development of strategic infrastructure and facilities to promote our abilities to maximize utilization of space, potential for wealth and employment creation, and 3, to enhance sector competitiveness for global and regional space opportunities and the development of coordination and promotion framework for research and innovation in space science, technology, and application. And we look forward to cooperating and partnering with all space community across the world. I thank you for your kind attention.
Thanks again to Cabinet Secretary Dr. Monica Juma for her keynote address. We're really honored that she taped these remarks for us today. It sets the right tone for this conversation. She touched on a number of topics that are really important and what we want to explore today: the benefits to African countries and then the trade and investment opportunities for the United States. She also raised questions about global power competition and national security concerns, and we'll want to tackle that as well. I know there are some that still chuckle when they hear about space programs in Africa. They tend to think of this as a vanity project or maybe a corruption scheme. And I'm going to just put my cards on the table. I'm a convert. When this is done responsibly, African programs, space programs really do present important opportunities for African publics and for countries in terms of development, in terms of trade and investment. And even launching satellites really isn't as expensive as I think sometimes in some people's minds. They still think of it as a sort of huge undertaking, but the affordability has become much more attainable now. So we'll talk about that as well. And I just want to put on in our conversation that African countries are playing important roles in space norms, something that I don't think we hear a lot in Washington. And hopefully we can draw that out today as well. I'm really delighted that we have such an esteemed panel to help us to separate fact from fiction, to make their best pitch on why this is important and why the United States should be helping African governments with their space programming. So let me just do a quick introduction to Dr. Julie Klinger. She holds a PhD in geography from the University of California, Berkeley. She is an assistant professor in the Department of Geography and Spatial Sciences at the University of Denver, and associate director of Minerals, Materials, and Society program. She's published numerous articles on rare earth elements, natural resources use, environmental politics, and outer space. Her 2017 book, Rare Earth Frontiers from Terrestrial Subsoils to Lunar Landscapes, was awarded the Meridian Book Prize for its unusually important contribution to art and science for geography. Joining Julie will be Temidayo Onyosun. He is the Managing Director of Space in Africa. It's an analytics and consulting company focusing on African space and satellite industry. It is, I'm going to embarrass you, Temidayo, it is the Bible for people who want to understand what's happening in space in Africa. Temidayo leads all of the company operations, including consulting services to governments and commercial companies in the African space industry value chain. He is a 2020 Carmen Fellow and has a master's degree in satellite applications from the University of Strathclyde in the United Kingdom. And of course, my partner in crime for today's event, Todd Harrison, needs no introduction, but he is the director of the Defense Budget Analysis. He is the director of the Aerospace Security Program here at CSIS. All right, Temidayo, you have some heavy lifting you need to do. Can you walk us through what is the state of play in terms of space programmings? Which countries are developing these programs? Who are the key foreign partners? And how do you see the benefits of these investments for African governments and publics?
Thank you very much. Over $4 billion has been spent by 12 countries in Africa to launch 40 satellites up to date. And these countries include Algeria, Angola, Ghana, Egypt, Ethiopia, Kenya, Morocco, Nigeria, Tunisia, Rwanda, South Africa, and Sudan. 3 other satellites have also been developed through multilateral partnership. 20 countries already have or are in the process of establishing a space program. In addition to the 12 countries I already mentioned, the others are Botswana, Burkina Faso, Gabon, Ivory Coast, Mauritius, Senegal, Uganda, and Zimbabwe. It is estimated that about 80 additional satellites will be launched between now and 2024 by these 20 countries, which will bring the number of African satellites to over 120. More countries are developing space programs, and in 2019 alone, about $800 million was spent on satellite projects. The space budgets of African countries have also increased by almost 50% in the past 3 years to $503 million in 2020, making it the fastest growing region in terms of government space investment. The African Union is also driving a continental space program that is expected to become operational very soon. In technology manufacturing, companies like New Space Systems, Simera Sense, and Dragonfly Aerospace are developing satellite components and supplying clients across the world. In satellite communications, companies like Nilesat, Nicomsat, and Rcomsat are capitalizing on their satellite infrastructures to bridge the digital divide challenges in Africa and beyond. And in astronomy, the over $2 billion square kilometer array project is currently being developed in South Africa with involvement from Botswana, Ghana, Kenya, Madagascar, Mauritius, Mozambique, Namibia, and Zambia. On key foreign partners, there have been a lot of partnership with Europe, China, and Russia in technology development and capacity building. Space have been instrumental for African countries in addressing various developmental challenges, from addressing hunger to healthcare, to education, to security, to fighting climate change, developing industries, and the sustainability of cities and communities. The industry in 2018 generated over $7.37 billion in revenue. And in the next 3 years, this is expected to rise to over $10 billion in annual revenue.
Thanks, Temidayo. So Todd, Temidayo paints a picture of a very dynamic space landscape on the continent. More than a dozen countries have programs, more than 100 satellites have been launched. Can you help us think about what Temidayo is talking about and what it means for the United States? What are the sort of the big issues for the US with its states program policy? And then how does Africa fit in this picture? And I'm particularly curious about, space norms and launch platforms and some of this national security concerns.
Yeah, well, what it means is space is becoming much more diversified than it used to be. And we talk about there being a space race going on right now, but it's a very different space race than what we experienced in the Cold War. The space race, back in the 1960s was really a bipolar competition between the United States and the Soviet Union. It was closely connected to each country's efforts to build out their nuclear and ballistic missile forces. And the prize in that competition, quickly became being the first country to land humans on the moon. So what we're seeing going on today in the global space environment is different in many ways. This is a multipolar competition. Commercial and civil space missions are playing a much larger role. And the moon is a destination, but not the prize. The real prize in this space competition is international partnerships. It's all about building coalitions for science and exploration and commerce in space that can translate to better engagement and influence here on Earth. And Africa is a key element in this competition.
Okay, so if the prize is partnerships, we can't be a think tank in Washington, D.C. in 2021 and not talk about China. So Julie, how does China think about its partnerships in space with African countries? And should African governments, should the United States have concerns? Maybe you could just walk us through positive and maybe some negative negative dimensions as well.
Okay, yeah, thank you so much. I'm really happy to be part of this conversation. As someone who has studied China's overseas investments and partnerships for the better part of a decade, one of the things that I've noticed when it comes to the space sector is that the more familiar China-Africa development framework that many of us might be familiar with doesn't actually help us that much in terms of understanding all the dynamics that are happening in the space sector, because we're not talking about unidirectional flows of aid or loans, right? Chinese firms, I should say, enter in most cases, in competitive processes when different space agencies request bids to build satellites, and China's firms don't always win. So just to kind of put this all in perspective here, China's firms are a little bit further down the list in terms of partnerships for bilateral space or satellite launch deals with African countries. And so, for example, if we look at launch contracts alone, Russia has launched the greatest number of satellites for African agencies, followed by France, then the US, then China, and then India and Japan. And of course, this is also in addition to the many multilateral or constellations of partnerships that we see occurring across the African continent, which Temidayo has told us about. So agencies such as Brazil's International Space Research Institute have a collaboration via their Earth observation satellite partnership with China to share data with a number of partners in Africa. And also, I think it's also worth noting here that when we're talking about China's partnerships, space partnerships with African countries, we're not always necessarily talking strictly about the National Space Agency. Often the protagonists are private firms. China's Great Wall Industry Corporation is a really important firm. And the way that we can understand China's space agency and its activities with overseas partners is kind of the way that we might understand the U.S. space agencies, interestingly enough, in that it's not a wholly public government-run thing, right? You have the government and the civilian space agencies are very important, but when a project comes online or people want to get things done or there's an international partnership in play, often subcontracting networks are involved that bring in a host of specialized firms in order to supply the necessary components or expertise in order to get a specific project done.
You know, you say you have this paper that you published last year, Julie, for Saiskari, and there's a line in there that says, China is not displacing US in satellite cooperation with African countries due to the simple fact that there are very few US programs to displace. Todd, is that true? Does that match the way that you think about US interest in space? And if so, why is that and what should we do about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's true in a kind of a macro sense. You can certainly find exceptions where NASA does have partnerships with a lot of African countries, but it's not as much as maybe it could have been. And I think that's where, you know, from a US perspective, we've got to recognize that NASA gives our country a real strategic advantage in this space competition, because NASA is the partner of choice all around the world. Even countries like China, until more recent years, they viewed NASA as the gold standard, the country you want to partner with. I think that's still true with a lot of African nations. And NASA already has this vast network of partnerships for various scientific type endeavors and decades-long relationships all around the world. And so I think that is the starting point. If we want to get more engaged with African countries in space, NASA is the way to do it. NASA is, really an incredible tool of soft diplomacy that is probably not fully appreciated throughout the US government or our national security enterprise.
Yeah, I've seen a little bit on cultural diplomacy from NASA going to, embassies to talk about what they're doing. And I would say that there's been some opportunities recently to talk about African Americans and their role in space and show that we have, that we are thinking about diversity when it comes to staffing our space agencies that I think could be very resonant. Temidayo, Monica Juma talked about protocols and standards, and she warned against unhealthy competition in her opening remarks. Can you talk a little bit about how you see this? What should African governments think about when they look at the US and China and Russia and some of the other players? And what should they be asking for in terms of standards and interoperability to make sure this benefits everyone?
Thank you very much. The space industry is built on international partnership, and Africa has always been open to this. To start with, I'd like to clear popular misconception that African countries are unable to afford space technology. Because from data that is available, African satellites are actually being funded by African institutions, either the government or research institutions, but these are funded by African countries. And possible area of collaboration include in satellite technology development, launch support, and capacity building. The areas with the most needs are in data sharing and support for projects that address critical problems. There is also like the equatorial advantage that countries like Italy and Turkey are already taking advantage of. As Dr. Juma earlier mentioned, Italy now has a partnership to revamp the Luigi Broglio Space Center in Kenya for launches, which is good for both parties. And Turkey's president in February announced a $1 billion moon mission that will see the country build a rocket launch site in Somalia. African Space Agency is also aiming to foster collaborations and resource sharing between African countries, which is also an avenue for foreign partners to conveniently work with 54 countries to explore Earth observation and communications opportunities. In the area of Earth observation, for example, Europe is already capitalizing on this by working with the African Union on the 30 million euros global monitoring of the environment and security project in Africa, a project which has been implemented in 45 African countries and supporting the management of the environment and natural resources and monitors humanitarian operations in Africa. And in the area of communications, more than half of Africa do not have internet connectivity, and satellite communications can help to address this. Bringing connectivity to them will generate billions in revenue while growing several industries in Africa. So this kind of collaboration is, both parties actually benefit from it. And collaborating with Africa on space technology is not a charity. There is a huge business opportunities here, both for Africa and for foreign partners. The continent has several needs that need to be addressed with space technologies and data, and collaboration can be seen as a form of diplomacy or business development. Commercial companies in the US can also see this as a hub for space business. Companies in Europe, China, and Russia, they already understand this. And you already mentioned that one of the ways to get involved, for the US to get involved, is through NASA. I also want to add that commercial space companies in the US can also actively get involved, through support, partnership, and business expansions with, institutions in Africa, just like European, Chinese, and Russian companies are already doing.
Thanks, Temidayo. Julia, I want to turn to you to see if you have any remarks about sort of this idea of a space race. And I will take full blame for naming this event the African Space Race. It's nothing like having a catchy title, but what are your thoughts about this framing, and does it make sense?
Thank you so much for this question. I think it actually speaks to the larger questions or concerns around, cooperation versus competition with respect to outer space. It's definitely a catchy title, but I guess there's two hazards that I'd like to note to using this. Because, it has its origin in the Cold War competition between rival superpowers, which had fundamentally different goals with respect to outer space. It has the risk of not actually describing what's happening in most of the rest of the world, most of the time, especially among countries on the African continent, where collaboration and cooperation are actually the norm, right? And we see this not just among African countries, but in their international partnerships, and also in the really vibrant public and private sector activities that are happening there as well. So that's kind of the first one, right? That we might bring a little bit too much of our Cold War baggage and blinder ourselves unintentionally. And the second, I think, actually speaks to better understanding Africa in particular. Again, speaking to a little bit of that Cold War baggage. I mean, during the Cold War, Africa was a site of proxy wars, and it was sort of framed as a subaltern in global politics. And so we need to note, right, that what is happening in the space sector in Africa is driven primarily by African countries themselves and financed primarily by African countries themselves. So it's not, we really shouldn't think about this as countries of the global north doing or giving things to leaders of African countries in exchange for ideological alignment or geopolitical allegiance. Although I certainly understand, with a think tank like CSIS, you need to be attentive to those dynamics where they're present as well. And so I think if we really look more closely at the collaboration and foreground that I think will allow us to harness competition in all of its really wonderful dynamic forms, right? But it really depends on how we look at and choose to understand the dynamic things that are happening in the African context.
Yeah, no, thank you for that, Julie. And in CSIS publications that the Africa program has done out, we've tried to use phraseology like constructive competition. But Todd, you've also said that the Cold War paradigm is not appropriate here, but are there things that the US government should be concerned about with the growth of our adversaries in space in Africa? Are there places and positioning that we need to have to advance our own interests?
Definitely there are. And I think, when it comes to the space domain, the United States wants to maintain its leadership position in space because we want to be able to establish positive, inclusive norms of behavior in space. I think that's very important. And what we see happening is, countries like Russia and China are trying to build an alternative coalition of nations to kind of retake that leadership mantle. And yeah, there is a competition going on here, but I agree with Julie that this does not have to be an adversarial competition. There can be cooperation and competition at the same time. Co-opetition, I think it's been called in business strategy, and I think there are real opportunities there. We should be, reaching out and trying to get, African nations and other nations, Latin American nations as well, to choose to partner with us, particularly for things like NASA's Artemis program to go back to the moon. And we should want them to sign up to the Artemis Accords, because if you go and you read the 10 principles of the Artemis Accords, it's all about establishing norms and positive ways of behaving and interacting with other countries in space. We want people to sign up for that. It does not have to be a kind of situation where you're either with us or against us. That's not what this is about. It's about getting people to sign up to be responsible partners in space. They can partner with other people as well, but to partner with us, we want them, to sign up to these principles, to be responsible actors in space. And I think this is a great opportunity where we can help build and strengthen that coalition of like-minded nations in space.
Thanks, Todd. And you inadvertently answered a question from Tyler Bender from Beyond Earth Institute. Thank you for doing that. For those of you who haven't submitted questions, super easy. Go to our website, click on the Ask a Question, and we'll try to get it within the next 20 minutes or so. I just wanted to foot stomp something you said, Todd, about the Artemis Accords and thinking about norms. And then, as I previewed earlier, the role Africans have in norms. So Egypt currently is the vice chair of the UN General Assembly's first committee, which looks at disarmament issues in space. Botswana, I believe, is the chair right now of the fourth committee at the UN, which moderates international cooperations. Africans have long been involved in the science and technical subcommittee of the ad hoc UN Committee on Peaceful Uses of Outer Space. So I want to make sure that we're thinking about this in terms of the Artemis Accords, which is, I think, a tremendous initiative, but also where's African leadership in international bodies? Temidayo, I'm going to throw the first question to you. It's tailor-made from you. This is from Tolu from Spacematics, and he wants to know, what are the opportunities for African space entrepreneurs to break through in this sector or even be pioneers?
Thank you very much. There is a growing number of new space companies emerging from Africa now. Both companies that are focusing on the upstream segment and the downstream segment. In fact, majority of the companies were actually funded in the past 5 years. And this is because more countries are trying to develop space program, and this is opening up, business activities for young entrepreneurs. So it's all about finding a niche. Take, for example, a couple of companies in Africa have been able to find the niche for the component manufacturing segment of the industry. And now we have lots of companies that are doing this from Africa and servicing like the global market. In fact, recently, a company called Dragonfly Aerospace, a South African new space company, was recently acquired by an Ukrainian billionaire because the company has a decade of proven heritage in high-performing imaging satellites and payloads. So we are seeing new companies on the continent that are, addressing different needs, both in the upstream and downstream segment. And they are also getting, a lot of support from the VC industries because a lot of investors in Africa now are looking at space. They see what is going on in Europe and they see what is going on in America. And they think it's now time to actually support African entrepreneurs that are looking at opportunities in the space industry. And a lot of these companies are also gaining government support. So to the person that asked the question, I want to say this is the best time to actually develop a space company in Africa.
I would also say, Temidayo, for the US audience, just to build on what you said, there has been this effort to elevate trade and investment in sub-Saharan Africa. This started with Prosper Africa, the Trump administration, and I'm sure the Biden administration will look to build on that. And I think one of the sectors that is really exciting is space, which, you've talked about in space in Africa, that this could be a $10 billion industry for Africa. So there's lots of opportunities for space entrepreneurs on the continent and lots of opportunities for partnership and investment from US companies as well. Julie, I feel like we have a little more to say about competition cooperation. That is a huge part of the Q&A that are coming in. So do you want to just expand a little bit on your thinking in response to some of the stuff that Todd has said earlier?
Sure, thank you. I think that that the aspirations and ideals, particularly for the U.S. to use outer space and outer space cooperation as a means for diplomatic engagement with partners around the world, continues to be an important motivating force for a lot of people to get involved in the space sector in the U.S. and also for partners around the world to want to work with the U.S. I think, though, in order to make sure that we don't go too far down this road where we're forcing other countries or partners into a framework that's along the lines of you're either with the US or against the US, we do have to look squarely at a number of policy developments in the US over the past decade that may actually be having exactly that effect. So I'm referring specifically to the 2011 Wolf Amendment, which does restrict partnerships with Chinese public or private entities where US public funding is involved in the space sector. And I am also referring to the 2015 Space Launch Competitiveness Act, which does look to protect the private property interests of US citizens in outer space. And of course, the fact that the Artemis Accords are by invitation only has stirred some controversy internationally. And so although each of these policies, I think, are meant to protect US interests and to protect US commercial and intelligence interests as well, these policies, I do think what we've seen over the past several years, combine with the fact that when it comes to satellite construction deals, launch partnerships, and things like this, the US often is not the lowest cost or most competitive provider. And so it's possible here that what we're seeing with the realignment between Russia and China and the different sorts of partnerships that we're seeing emerge across the globe, these policies may actually have the effect of marginalizing the US and recreating, to resort to a metaphor that belongs to a different sector in a different time, recreating a kind of coalition of the willing against which the rest are pitted. And this isn't really what is envisioned in the 1967 Outer Space Treaty, to which Russia and China and the US and 130 other countries are actually party. I mean, the whole point is that we collectively, internationally, collaborate in the space domain, that we share information, that we agree to basic ground rules, not to militarize, weaponize, or privatize different aspects of outer space, so that it can remain an open domain where innovation, science, research, and goals as diverse as national development and cultural exchange and entertainment are all possible and feasible for different countries to pursue, whether now or decades into the future, as different countries are ready and able to do that.
Todd, and then Temidayo, is this valid? And if so, what do we do about it?
Yeah, Julie brought up some great points, very valid points. In terms of the Wolf Amendment, in my view, that's been a complete failure of U.S. policy. It has not worked. It was intended to try to change Chinese behavior, and it wasn't just directed at space. It was also about religious freedom. Clearly, that has not worked. And clearly refusing to allow NASA to partner with China has not slowed or set back, Chinese space capabilities at all. In fact, it may have made them more determined. And our own McKenna Young here at CSIS has written about this very well. I'd encourage people to go look that up on our website. But I think that there are several things the new administration can do, and one of them is pushing Congress to repeal the Wolf Amendment. It doesn't mean you immediately start partnering with China. It just means you get that off the books, and then you make that a possibility in the future. You have the ability to have a carrot, in negotiations with China. It also sends a good message, a positive message to other countries that we're viewing this differently now. But also, the point on the Artemis Accords, I know from talking to folks at NASA, the intent of the Artemis Accords is eventually to make it open so that any country that's willing to sign up to these principles could join. And that is something the Biden administration could, accelerate and go ahead and start pushing that more internationally to bring in as many countries as possible, right? If they're willing to sign up to these principles, absolutely be part of the Artemis program. Every country, I think, has something it can contribute, regardless of the level their space industry is at right now. And to, some of the points that Temidayo was making earlier, we've seen a lot of advances in, commercial consumer electronics, higher power processors, smaller sensors and components that have been making their way into the space world. And it's allowed small satellites, microsatellites, to do missions that used to be the exclusive domain of very large, expensive satellites. It has really, and that combined with, advances we've seen in the launch sector with partially reusable launch vehicles, higher launch cadence, ride-share agreements, dedicated small launch vehicles. All of that is bringing down the cost of launch and making space launch much more accessible to people around the world. So all of this technological development combined has lowered the barriers to entry. That's why we see a lot of new innovative space companies in the United States. They don't start out, from some big, defense prime with tons of funding. A lot of these companies are starting out very small with very limited capital. And so, that is an opportunity for small businesses around the world to, really break into this market and do new and innovative and exciting things. So I think Temidayo is exactly right. There are huge opportunities here for African companies in this new era of space exploration.
Temidayo, if you have anything to add, I'd love to hear it, but can I also throw another question in, because I think you're perfectly poised to answer this, from Tim Spuck from Associated Universities, Inc. And he asks, what do you see as the primary workforce development needs in Africa to ensure the evolution of space development programs? So thoughts on this very complicated conversation that we're having right now, an important one, but then getting back to sort of the development issues.
Thank you very much. On the previous question, I think the US would actually need to compete with other regions in Africa. It's not just, I don't see countries working with US companies or, NASA just because, they're US companies. There is also competition at that level. So, for example, there is a reason why an African countries would choose to go with like a French company rather than a Chinese company, for example. There are a lot of factors that are involved in this, whether it is pricing, whether it is the level of technology and all of these. And these are things that American institutions will also have to compete with. Also, the way the space industry works, I don't think you need just one partner. You can work with multiple partners. A country can work with the US, work with China, work with Europe, work with Russia. As far as the goal and ambitions are being achieved, that's what is important for them. To answer your last question on the workforce development. So there is actually a massive gap in this in Africa presently. There's massive gap in the workforce. And some of the reasons for this is because, one, there are very few institutions in Africa that offer space-related programs. So a lot of Africans that need to get training, for example, aerospace engineering, some of them are forced to travel out of Africa to get degrees and get trained and all of that. And a lot of countries are actually capitalizing on this, like Russia, like Japan. Take Japan, for example. They've worked with Rwanda, they've worked with Ghana, they've worked with Nigeria on capacity development. So there are some countries that are focusing on this part. And I think largely there is a need to grow the workforce in Africa, to train people. And while some of these are being done outside of Africa, there is a need for them to be done in Africa. Because oftentimes when you see people go outside of Africa to get trained, sometimes they don't come back, and that's not good for the continent. So the need for workforce is in the area of technology development in Africa presently. So if that's like an avenue for some institutions to come into, and I actually think that American institutions are very perfect for to actually bridge this kind of gap through partnership, collaborations with space agencies, as well as research institutions in Africa.
Yeah, for our U.S. Government audience, thinking about how what Temidayo was talking about fits into the Young African Leaders Initiative, but hopefully that the Biden team will think more broadly about educational programs, and hopefully this will be a component of it. This has been almost the fastest hour I think I've had on screen at a CSIS event. So we really only have time now for some sort of concluding thoughts, and I'll start with Julie and then Temidayo and then end with my colleague Todd. But just some top level sort of thinking about what's the pitch, why is this important, what should Africans and US governments and other international partners be doing together? Or you can take whatever part of that you want, Julie.
All right, yeah, great. Closing thought here, I have two things to say. So the first, to US government, private sector counterparts, when it comes to understanding the space sector in Africa, you cannot generalize across the continent. It's really important. And I would urge you to go and learn and listen. And this is important not just for understanding better what's going on and identifying new partners and opportunities, but also from a very pragmatic sense to make sure that if and when we do invest more in these partnerships, that we don't duplicate areas of expertise or initiatives that are actually already occurring. Right? This is important to point out. So although there are really important needs for workforce development in certain areas, there is also a really rich, deep pool of technical capacity and scientific expertise within African institutions. And so finally, I'll just say this. I said it was two, but I've got three actually, that US universities really should be looking to strengthen their partnerships in this area with universities on the African continent. Thank you.
Thanks, Julie. And if you want to learn more, if you want to start that process that Julie mentioned, no better place than Space in Africa. Temidayo, what are your parting shots, recommendations?
Okay, so I think space technologies and the space industry generally is very important, for national security, for intelligence, and it is important for the US to actually pay more attention to it. China, Europe, Russia, they've understand this, and they're benefiting a lot from this in terms of diplomacy, in terms of business development. And I think this is also critical for the US at this period, especially as the US is, trying to retain its spot at the, #1 country when it comes to space. I think, looking at Africa for opportunities, for collaborations would be key to actually achieving this. Thank you.
Todd, one of our secret ambitions was to bring my community, the folks that focus on Africa, and your community that focuses on space together for this conversation. And having served in government, I could tell you they don't often mix. So what are your recommendations and thoughts to bring these two communities together on this very important issue?
Yeah, I would say that we've got to, recognize the soft diplomatic power of space and what that can do to help our relationships with African countries, here on Earth across a whole host of issues. I think at the forefront of this is, we should let NASA be NASA, right? What NASA is great at is building these international partnerships for science and exploration. And, we really need to enable NASA to do that, to a much greater extent in Africa than is already being done. And I think the focus there should be providing enabling capabilities, building expertise and workforce, and unlocking the full potential that African government and commercial space programs can have, not just for Africa, but for the world community. And so, I think that's a key area that the new administration should be focused on, and back it up with real funding, with bringing in African countries as real full partners on programs like the Artemis program, but also some, remote sensing, earth science type programs as well. Really redouble our efforts there. And I think it will pay all sorts of dividends in the future.
Thanks so much, Todd. I hope that we'll have more of these conversations with you, with our audiences, with experts like Julian Temidayo. Let me thank first Cabinet Secretary Monica Juma for her opening remarks. Thank Parsons for their support. And just to reiterate my enthusiasm that Todd and I could do this together. I hope everyone has a wonderful Friday, and hopefully we'll talk soon. Bye.